There comes a moment in every believer's life when heaven goes quiet. The prayers that once felt alive begin to echo back empty. The worship that used to move you suddenly feels mechanical. You wait, you listen, but there's only silence. It's not that you've stopped believing, it's that you've run out of sound. And that's when it begins, the season no one warns you about, the one where God hides in plain sight. At first, it feels like abandonment. You replay every mistake, wondering which one drove him away. You scroll through sermons and verses, searching for a spark, a sign, anything. But the more you reach, the quieter it becomes, until you start to suspect that maybe you've been forgotten. But what if the silence isn't punishment? What if it's preparation? What if this quiet is the sound of God rearranging everything beneath the surface, your circumstances, your faith, your understanding of Him? Because here's the truth: when God goes silent, He's not ignoring you, He's inviting you. The silence is the soil where trust grows roots deep enough to hold what's coming next. And just when you think He's done with you, everything shifts. The door that never opened suddenly swings wide. The weight that crushed you for years lifts overnight. The same silence that broke you becomes the very signal that breakthrough has begun. This isn't theory, it's rhythm. The divine pattern between silence and revelation. And once you understand it, you'll stop fearing the quiet, because you'll know it's the sound of God moving closer. It starts in the quiet hours when the world is asleep, and the hum of your own thoughts becomes too loud to ignore. You've prayed, you've pleaded, you've fasted, you've done everything you know to do. And yet, heaven remains silent. The God who once met you in songs and answered your tears with warmth now feels a million miles away. You wake up and wonder if He's still listening. You tell yourself it's just a season, but deep down, you feel like something inside you is slipping. The silence becomes unbearable because it feels personal. It's not just that He isn't speaking, it's that He used to. You remember the nights you felt His presence like fire, the moments you could sense His direction without a word. But now, it's different. The Bible feels heavy, the words empty. You whisper into the dark, "Where are you?" And for the first time, there's no reply. Only stillness. Days pass, then weeks. The silence grows thicker, like fog. You start questioning everything: your faith, your purpose, your worth. You wonder if maybe you've done something wrong. Maybe you took a wrong turn somewhere and now God has turned away. That's the lie that creeps in first, the one that convinces you His silence is rejection. But what you don't see yet is that the silence isn't distance, it's depth. Because God doesn't speak less when He loves you less. He speaks differently when He's preparing you for more. There's a sacred mystery in the way God moves. He often withdraws His voice to strengthen your discernment. He hides not to abandon you, but to shift the way you seek. When His words fade, His ways begin to speak louder. The unanswered prayer becomes an invitation to grow in perception, to see Him in the things that don't make sense. You see, when everything is loud, your dependence is shallow. But when everything quiets, you begin to see. You start to notice divine fingerprints in ordinary things. A conversation that feels strangely timely. A closed door that spares you from chaos. A delay that turns into direction. The silence is not the absence of His voice, it's the amplification of His movement. And so you wait, but not passively. You learn to listen differently. you begin to realize that God's silence is not a punishment. It's a repositioning. He's not ignoring you, he's rearranging everything around you. The very thing that feels like stillness is the space he's clearing for transformation. The delay that makes you restless is the pause before the shift. But the shift never comes in the way you expect. It never starts with the loud moments of glory or miracles falling from the sky. It starts in the cracks, in the small, barely noticeable changes in your spirit. One day, you stop waking up with panic. One day, you feel peace for no reason. One day, you realize you're no longer begging for clarity. You're trusting without it. And that is when it happens. That is when the silence begins to speak. You start to hear God, not in the thunder, but in the quiet knowing. You begin to see that every unanswered prayer was never ignored, was redefined. You weren't being punished. You were being prepared. The silence wasn't to make you feel small, it was to teach you how to carry something greater. Because what's coming next will require a deeper kind of hearing, the kind that only silence can shape. This is the first shift. It's not external, it's internal. It's the moment you stop asking, "Why isn't God speaking?" and start asking, "What is He building in me while He's silent?" And when that question finally settles in your heart, something breaks open. You realize He was never gone. He was speaking through every delay, every disappointment, every unreturned prayer. He was teaching you to recognize His presence without needing proof. And that's when the ground beneath you begins to move. Slowly at first, like a heartbeat returning after stillness. The same silence that once suffocated you now feels sacred, like standing in the center of something vast, unseen, but alive. You don't have the answers yet. You don't even have the plan. But for the first time in a long time, you have peace, because you finally understand. He's sculpting. And the quieter it gets, the closer He is to completion. And soon, very soon, you'll see what He was building all along. There's a point in every season of silence when you stop fighting it and simply sit in it. Not out of surrender, but out of exhaustion. You stop trying to decode the why. You stop demanding signs. You stop chasing the version of faith that always needs noise. And strangely, that's when the silence begins to soften. The edges of your restlessness start to blur, and what once felt like abandonment begins to feel like atmosphere. Like maybe this stillness isn't empty after all. In the beginning, silence felt like punishment. Now it feels like invitation. One morning, you wake before dawn. The air is heavy, gray, quiet. The kind of quiet that feels alive, humming with hidden movement. You sit on the edge of your bed, not praying, not thinking, just being. And in that stillness, something rises, not a voice, not words, but awareness. The kind that whispers, "I'm here." It's not loud, not dramatic, but it's real. And in that moment, you realize something profound. God was never gone. He was simply teaching you to hear Him beneath the surface. Because silence isn't God withholding His presence, sits Him deepening your perception. You start to see the pattern now. Every season of silence in Scripture led to transformation. Joseph sat in a prison before he ruled a kingdom. David hid in caves before he held a crown. Even Jesus went silent in the grave before resurrection. Heaven's quiet is never empty. It's always pregnant with purpose. And now you're living your own version of that. The anxiety that once filled the quiet begins to fade. You no longer demand answers. You wait for awareness. You begin to see that silence is not about God's absence, it's about His artistry. The potter doesn't speak while he shapes the clay. The sculptor doesn't explain every chisel strike. The process doesn't make sense while you're spinning on the wheel, but the silence is where your form takes shape. Then, just when you've grown used to the quiet, something begins to stir. It starts subtly as sudden opportunity, a change in atmosphere, a small coincidence that feels too intentional to ignore. You try to stay calm, but your spirit feels it. Something is about to shift, but before the breakthrough, there's always the test. Out of nowhere, old doubts creep back in. The peace you found in the silence starts to tremble. Circumstances that seem stable begin to shake. It's as if God is asking, did you learn to trust me, or did you just learn to wait for me to fix it? It's the hardest question of all, because trust isn't proven by how well you wait, it's proven by how steady you remain when nothing changes. And yet, this is where the transformation deepens. You stop measuring God's faithfulness by the noise of miracles and start measuring it by the endurance of peace. This is the second shift. When silence becomes strength, you realize now that silence is where God teaches you to build without applause. It's where He hides you to prepare you. What looks like delay is actually divine development. You think you're being overlooked, but heaven is protecting you from being seen before you're ready. Because what He's building in the silence requires foundation, one that can hold what's coming. And foundations are always built underground. The enemy whispers, you've been forgotten. But the truth is, you're being formed. You're in the part of the story where the roots go deep before the bloom breaks the soil. You don't see progress because it's happening where no one can see it. And then it happens, a small sign. A door that had been sealed for years suddenly creaks open. A connection forms. A prayer you buried in frustration suddenly blooms in reality. It's subtle, but unmistakable. And it feels different this time. Not like relief, but like confirmation. Because now, you're not desperate for the miracle, you're grounded in the one who gives it. You see now that silence was never about waiting for God to speak again. It was about becoming someone who could recognize His voice everywhere. And as this truth settles into your bones, you feel something rise in your spirit, a sense that the silence is about to break completely. But this time, it won't be with words. It will be with movement. The shift is coming. You can feel it, not as fear, but as gravity. Something divine is aligning. And when it happens, you won't have to chase it, it will find you. Because when the silence finishes its work, sound returns transformed. And so do you. It always comes when you least expect it, the shift. Not in lightning or miracles, not in the fireworks of answered prayers, but in something quieter, subtle, almost hidden. You wake one morning and realize your heart feels different. The worry that used to grip you has loosened its hold. The future no longer feels like a threat, it feels like an unfolding. You can't explain why, but something deep inside whispers, it's time. The silence hasn't ended, but it has transformed. It's no longer cold, it's warm, almost sacred. You start to see what you couldn't before, that the silence was never punishment, it was the sound of construction. God was building your foundation in the dark, because what He's about to release requires a strength you didn't have before. You begin to notice that divine timing is not random, it's rhythmic. Like the tide, it withdraws before it rushes in. You've been standing in the EB, wondering if the water would ever return. But what you didn't see was that the retreat was part of the rhythm. God was gathering what you needed out of sight, preparing to return it multiplied. Then it happens. Something shifts in your reality and opportunity, a conversation, a door that opens effortlessly after years of slamming shut. The silence breaks, but not with noise, with clarity. You look back and realize every unanswered prayer, every closed door, every painful delay was divinely positioned. You weren't being denied. You were being aligned. This is the third shift, when revelation replaces reaction, because now you can see that faith isn't built in the moments of answered prayers, it's built in the spaces between them. You understand that God's silence was never neglect. It was nurture. He was preparing your heart to carry what you had been praying for without it breaking you. The waiting didn't waste you, it refined you. And now that refinement is beginning to show. You start to speak differently, move differently, think differently. You no longer ask, when will things change? Instead, you ask, what is this moment asking of me? That's when you realize you're not waiting for breakthrough anymore. You are the breakthrough. You feel it in your spirit. The shift is both external and internal. God isn't just changing your circumstances. He's changing you. You've become someone who doesn't need constant confirmation, because your confidence now comes from presence. You've stopped begging for signs because you finally recognize the greatest sign of all, peace. Peace that doesn't depend on progress. Peace that doesn't demand proof. Peace that doesn't vanish when life doesn't go your way. You start to live differently. You stop chasing doors that close, because you trust the ones that open will never require you to compromise who you are. You start walking in sync with a rhythm you can't see but can feel in every step. And with every move forward, the world begins to respond. People begin to notice something about you. They can't name it, but they feel it, the quiet authority that comes from walking through silence and surviving it. Because silence doesn't just shape your patience, it shapes your presence. It gives you a weight that words can't manufacture. You no longer need to prove that you've heard from God. The peace around you proves it for you. But here's the mystery. The shift isn't complete yet. There's one more layer, one more unveiling. Because after the silence and the shift comes the sound, the moment when everything that was hidden bursts into motion. The things that once delayed suddenly accelerate. The prayers that lingered unanswered now echo back all at once. And when it happens, it won't feel like something new, it'll feel like something familiar, like the completion of a rhythm that's been playing all along. You'll realize it was never random, it was never wasted. Every second of silence was synchronized with the sound of what was coming. The waiting wasn't punishment, it was prophecy, and now you're standing on the edge of its fulfillment. Something is stirring beneath the surface of your life. Right now, unseen momentum that's been gathering in secret. And when it breaks, it will happen fast. Not because God suddenly decided to move, but because you finally became still enough to move with Him. Everything that's about to unfold is not a reward for your waiting, it's the result of your becoming. You're about to see why it had to be silent first. There comes a moment when everything changes, not gradually, but suddenly. One day you're waiting, and the next, you realize you've stepped into the very thing you prayed for, without even noticing how you got there. The same silence that once felt unbearable now feels sacred. The same stillness that used to feel like loss now feels like life. Because what was happening in the quiet wasn't the end, was the setup. Not a loud one, not a dramatic explosion of answered prayers. It's quieter than that. It's peace. That rare, unexplainable kind of peace that hums deep in your bones. The kind that whispers, "You made it through." You look around and realize the waiting is over. But more importantly, you've changed. You're no longer desperate for signs, because you've become sensitive to presence. You don't crave clarity, because you've grown comfortable walking in trust. And that's when God moves. Not because you begged harder, but because you finally stopped striving. His timing was never delayed. It was deliberate. You were being stretched, strengthened, stripped of everything that couldn't survive the weight of your destiny. Now, every unanswered prayer makes sense. Every delay, every disappointment, every sleepless night, they were all preparation for this moment. The silence wasn't a pause in the story. It was the place where roots grew strong enough to bear the fruit that's now beginning to bloom. The shift comes softly at first. A text message you didn't expect. A conversation that opens a door you thought was locked. A solution that arrives the moment you stop forcing it. And then it happens again and again until you realize the floodgates have opened. You aren't chasing alignment anymore. You are aligned. You aren't waiting for breakthrough. You've become it. But something even deeper is happening underneath the surface, something eternal. You start to see that the real miracle was never what changed around you. It was what changed within you. God didn't remove the silence to reward you. He removed it because you no longer needed it. You've learned to carry His stillness inside you. You walk through life differently now. You no longer panic when heaven feels quiet because you understand what it means. Movement is happening behind the veil. You no longer beg for signs because you see them in everything: the sunrise, the timing of a song, the peace that comes in waves. You no longer rush the process because you trust the one who authors it. And then, one night, you find yourself back where it all began, in the quiet. Except this time, the silence doesn't scare you. You sit in it like an old friend. You breathe deeply, eyes closed, and whisper, "I know you're here." And you feel it, a presence so deep it's almost tangible. Not outside you, not hovering above, but within you. You realize the silence was never God withholding Himself. It was Him merging Himself with you until His peace became your pulse. His voice, your instinct. His timing, your rhythm. You've stepped into oneness. The place where prayer stops sounding like pleading and starts feeling like breathing. This is the final shift, when silence becomes sound and sound becomes stillness, and both are holy. You finally understand why He went quiet, because the noise of the world would have drowned out the sound of what He was growing inside you. The silence was His shield, His sanctuary, His signal. And now, as you sit in the calm after the storm, you know something unshakable. He was never far. He was forming. The silence wasn't the end of your faith story. It was the moment it began to mature. So now, when life gets quiet again, won't panic. You'll smile. because you'll remember this rhythm. Silence, surrender, shift. And you'll know the quiet isn't the absence of God. It's the sound of Him moving. Mountains you can't yet see. You'll whisper the same words you once said in desperation, but this time with peace instead of fear. Lord, I trust you. And the silence will answer softly, steadily, powerfully, like a heartbeat from heaven itself. I never stopped speaking. And just like that, everything shifts again.